I'm here with the noted science fiction writer, Neal Stephenson, an old friend, to talk about the challenges of climate change and how science fiction writers respond to that. Neal, let me begin by asking, do you feel we still suffer under innovation starvation? An inability to get big things done? And do you still believe that science fiction writers have played a part in failing to inspire technologists as they did in the 50s and the 60s?
So you're referring to a project that we talked about a few years ago called Hieroglyph, which was exactly about those things. And we had a little experiment at Arizona State to write some more inspirational stories in that vein. It's clear that at least in this country, it's quite difficult for us to build certain things that we really do need to build in order to address climate change specifically. Probably other things as well, but we're talking about climate, so let's talk about climate. So the most noteworthy recent example was that there was an effort to build power lines from Quebec down through New England into the northeastern corridor to supply hydropower, and it's had a hard time. It's been blocked by protests that sort of are traveling under the banner of environmentalism. Mm. But whether it's really environmentalism, I think is very much open to question. It's more like landowners, stakeholders in certain areas weaponizing environmental laws from the 1970s to get their way.
In Termination Shock, you imagine a world in the not too distant future where climate change is a reality. Some of it's very familiar, some of it's more shocking. People walk around in the hotter parts of the earth in earth suits. Nations are drowning. You didn't seem to find much difficulty in imagining yourself into a future where climate change was real. Have you been shocked in your own lifetime by the speed of the change? Do you think you grasp the full extent of the challenges we'll face over the next decade?
It's like the old joke, how did you go bankrupt? Slowly and then suddenly. When prior to the Industrial Revolution, the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere was in the mid 200s. When I was born, it was 320. And today it's almost 420. I checked this morning. It's 419 point something. It'll definitely be 420 next year because it's gone up by 2 a year. So that is a huge change. I mean, it basically went up by 60 or 70 between the mid 1700s and the mid 1900s. But it's gone up by an additional 100 during my lifetime, and we're clearly seeing the results of that. So yes, I feel now as though, although I thought I understood the greenhouse effect and so on, kind of intellectually as a younger person, that I kind of slept on it for a few decades there, and now suddenly it seems like almost the only thing worth thinking about.
Termination Shock includes a Texan billionaire who embarks upon an unsanctioned, unregulated effort at geoengineering, shooting silica up into the sky. Do you think it will require an intervention of that scale to address climate change? Or do you believe that what a venture capitalist would be expected to believe, that a series of incremental, smaller scale interventions, doing the laundry piece by piece, will be sufficient to the challenge?
I think what's really needed is an effort that's much, much larger than what is described in the book. And instead of the kind of Band-Aid approach of creating an atmospheric screen to bounce back some of the sun's energy, which is what happens in the book, what we need to do is remove carbon from the atmosphere on an incredibly gigantic scale. And I believe it's going to be the largest technological effort in human history. And I think it'll succeed eventually. I think that in the meantime, it's possible that some people might try some of those geoengineering efforts, such as are described in the book, just because it's cheap and easy compared to the scale of the problem. And really the only thing that prevents people from doing that sort of thing is the fear that somebody else won't like it. But if you're a nation state and you're suffering cataclysmic damage and loss of life as the result of climate change, then it's obviously in your national interest as a nation state to take some steps of this nature.
I fear that all the time, that there will be a strong incentive for rogue nations or even individuals, you imagine, to make an intervention of this sort. But what is good for China might not be good for India, and it will be the largest planetary experiment in history. Your peer, Kim Stanley Robinson, wrote a book as well, trying to grapple with this future, where he seemed to imagine something even more radical than the technological inventions you imagined, a kind of a revolution of the heart, where we would have to dispense with our normal forms of capitalism and our ordinary human incentives. Did that strike you as plausible or necessary?
So Stan's book, I should say, opens with an incredibly well researched and well conceived description of what's known as a wet bulb event, which is a situation where both the temperature and the humidity have risen to a point that's not compatible with human life. And if you're in a place that's having one of these events and you don't have air conditioning, it's just a biological fact that you're going to die. So that's a great example of the kind of event that I fear we'll begin to see within the next decade. And it sets the stage for what you just described in the remainder of that book. I'm all in favor, but I'm maybe crippled by my own cynicism and think that we're going to have to find a way to make capitalism work in our favor on this.
That opening scene is worth the price of admission. An American aid worker is left alone in a city beside a lake where everyone has crowded, and he looks around and he's the only living person. I tend to agree that we will need to find incentives to make capitalism work for us to do things like direct air capture of carbon, reusing carbon for industrial purposes to make jet fuel. It's difficult for me to be an optimist about the future without imagining ways to use human nature as it actually is. Do you find yourself an optimist about our challenges, or a pessimist? I mean, what comes across in your books more than anything else is how much you revel on the weirdness and the inventiveness of human beings. I'm curious if you think human weirdness and inventiveness can be turned to the problems we face.
I think it can, and I would say that I reached my low point about all of this a year or two ago. Since then, really since I wrote the book, I've gotten to know a lot more about what's going on in the world of carbon capture.
Yeah.
And I've seen brilliant people from technical backgrounds, not necessarily the sort of environmentalists per se, but sort of nerds, hackers, geeks, whatever you want to call them, pivoting from ordinary tech careers into thinking about exactly this sort of thing. We've got what's going on with Stripe, climate. That's a great example. I could point you to, say, Terraform Industries, which is a startup in Pasadena that's working on direct air capture at scale and production of synthetic fuels. There's a lot of quite brilliant people right now who 20 years ago would have no question have gone into classic tech startups. And maybe they did, but now what they're doing is trying to apply their brain power to solving these kinds of problems.
I don't know if it increases your optimism, Neal, but my own feeling on this issue has changed a lot since I ceased to be a full-time journalist and editor. I used to be a terrible pessimist. Ernie Moniz, the head of the MIT Energy Initiative, once told me it was already too late, and that's how I used to feel about it. And in one sense, he's right, but in another sense, now that I actually work directly in the field, about a third of DC VC's investments are directly in climate tech, and in one way or another, all our investments surround it. I'm astonished by how many brilliant young men and women who can lift up whole buildings with the sounds of their voices are working on real solutions, one problem at a time, to address things like using synthetic nitrogen in fertilizer or capturing carbon to put into jet fuel. There are enormous reasons for optimism. And I think one of the things I take away from what we used to worry about with innovation starvation isn't that we're starved for innovation. It's where we're starved for a sense of optimism and getting enough capital and enough policy support, enough citizen support behind the solutions that do exist.
I think a big reason for the comparative success of the old school technologies that we remember fondly, the space program and that sort of thing, was more than purely science and technology. It had to do with a feeling that people, by working in those programs, were part of something big. They were part of building a cool future, and that's missing in a lot of sort of classic tech company startups. It's like, we're going to build a more effective spam filter, or we're going to find a more efficient way to route advertisements to social media users. All in their own way, as interesting and as challenging intellectually as building a rocket ship, but without that sense of that redemption, the idea that I'm part of something that's important. And we're not used to thinking of environmental initiatives in that light, because they've tended to be sort of about what can we subtract, let's turn the thermostat down, let's ride our bicycle to work, let's get rid of nuclear power or whatever. And when you say that it's too late, I think what that means is it's too late to solve the problem by doing that. But it's not too late to solve the problem with big engineering. And so I think a lot of what you and I are both seeing in this realm is people who are inspired by that, not just by the mission, which is a valuable mission, but by the sense that we're building something really big and cool here.
I think that's right. I think that's right, Neal, to ask people to degrowth, stop doing things, to abandon their hopes for a better life for their children. All that seems to fly in the face of the human desire to believe in the future and to believe in something big. Science and technology has the capacity to solve big problems, to grow wealth for people, to expand human possibilities. And the people who I meet working in climate tech have that sense of the future. Also arguably what inspired people in the 60s and the 70s, the going to the moon, is a really bad metaphor for the problems we have to solve in the future. Going to the moon was just 3 days away, and it had a discrete beginning, a middle, and an end. And we're asking people now to join the show, the greatest show on earth that never ends, and to imagine a very different future with different types of organization.
It's terraforming, except we're terraforming our own planet.
You do have a barely suppressed apocalyptic tendency, though. In 7E, which is one of my favorite of your books from 2015, a book that spans 5,000 years, you imagine, without too much explanation, the moon exploding. Was that a metaphor for climate change, or just a MacGuffin to get the story rolling?
I don't think it's wrong to say that there's a metaphor there. I mean, it's I shy away from it a bit because no one likes kind of heavy-handed allegory in their fiction, but it does pose an example of a kind of planetary crisis that no one can argue with. So everyone can look up and see that this has happened, and no one can dispute it. In Don't Look Up, which is about a movie about an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth, that element is lacking. The only way that we know that this asteroid is going to hit the Earth is because a bunch of astronomers go on talk shows and claim that it's so. And consequently, that ends up being a great metaphor for climate change, in that there's no kind of visible proof that's accessible to ordinary people, and so a lot of people don't think it's really happening. So you could think of 7 as sort of almost in a way an easier problem to solve, in that at least everyone on day one gets together and agrees that a massive effort is going to be needed.
I mean, the sheer scale of the problem is difficult to imagine, I think, sometimes. Civilizations are defined by things like labor relations, but they're also defined by how we use energy. Ancient Rome derived its energy from the human capital of slaves. And our entire civilization has been based upon this barbarousness of burning and cracking hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
And we are right on the edge of a future where we have to imagine the next civilization. We exist in a liminal age. And I think one of the great benefits of books like Termination Shock is you invite people to imagine at least the beginnings of what that next energy era might conceivably look like.
Yeah, nature stored up solar energy for millions of years in the form of these hydrocarbons, and we figured out that we could just suck them out of the ground and set fire to them and radically change our civilization. It's bizarre to read, say, Moby Dick or any literature of the first half of the 19th century, and realize that oil for these people was something you got by going out and killing whales and boiling them down. That was where they got oil. The very word petroleum, is rock oil. It's, oh, look, we can get it from rocks too. So that was a very odd thing that happened in our technological history. And we're just now fully understanding kind of what we've done to ourselves. And the hope is that during that 150 years of just binging on almost free energy, that we build enough of a civilization to get us off of that addiction.
I have one last question for you before we part. A few years ago, when we were speaking on stage at MIT, I challenged your feminism by saying if you were a better feminist, you would have more characters who were women who had bad or evil, or at least deeply ambiguous motives. You said that in Seven Eves, you felt you would show me. Do you feel?
Yeah, I decided I would rise to that challenge, Jason, with one particular character in that book, because I thought the point was very well taken. Yes, it's all true. Julia is it's your fault.
Julia is the deeply evil president who breaks her promise and joins the exodus from Earth, having sworn she was not. Neal, it's a delight to see you again. I hope we're in the same city sometime. We can compare notes on climate technologies.
Nebraska, where I've been looking at a climate-related company called Monolith, and the whole, well, not the whole way, but a large part of the way from Omaha to Des Moines is just wind turbines to the horizon.
Wind horizons as far as you can see. The beginning of this new climate tech civilization that we're describing, and beneath those windmills are fields of corn, many of which have been planted and fertilized, not using synthetic nitrogen from the Haber-Bosch process, but from microbial fertilizers that don't produce any emissions, only have to be laid down once, and don't poison the soil. So I think that Des Moines landscape, that Iowa landscape, is a good place to end. It can sometimes seem like we're nowhere, that it would require a miracle to save us. But the good news is that miracles happen in technology all the time.
It's either Prime or Premier, but it's a sequestration company that's actually sequestering more carbon than anyone else. And they're taking corn stover, which is everything except the kernels, and they're turning it into a kind of oil and injecting it into the ground. So it's a more stable kind of configuration for it to be in than CO2, which can leak out and get back into the atmosphere.
We have a company called 12 that is capturing carbon from industrial processes. You can do it from direct air capture as well if you want. And it's translating that carbon directly into useful industrial products rather than cracking hydrocarbons. So the US Air Force hopes to use it as jet fuel. You can make gases from it. I think there was this period when it seemed impossible that we would ever wean ourselves from this stored solar energy. But I take a degree of comfort in that I am facing a fire hose every day of smart young people saying, I've got this great solution.
Fantastic.
Give me some money.
Well, I've spent the morning exchanging messages with a veteran video game programmer and a veteran crypto programmer who they're turning their attention to this, and we're sending each other pictures of carbon. So yeah, it's coming. It's very exciting.
I think the difficult, and then we will stop shortly. I think the difficult thing, which is which we haven't talked about, which is part of the solution, though, is it is going to be within our lifetimes, and certainly my kids' lifetimes. There's going to be this period of where resilience and adaptation will also be demanded, because the world is going to change. Places on the globe which had been comfortable to live in, as Termination Shock suggests, will be less comfortable, and we'll be living with the industrial choices we made over the last 100 years for the next 1,000. And what that looks like, I think, is a job for science fiction writers to describe.
I agree. It's smoky here.
Okay.
Seattle has a new season.
Yeah.
It's called the smoke season. It's between summer and fall. And, I won't say it's unlivable, but it's unpleasant. So it's happening everywhere. But
Well, we'll fix that too. Neal, thank you very much.
My pleasure.